Hello and welcome back to another episode of Fully Booked, the Hidden Gems author podcast in which Craig Touch and myself, Roland Hume, chat some of the interesting figures and leading lights of this crazy industry of writing and self-publishing. And today we are absolutely looking at the future. We are talking to James Yu, who is an author himself, but also the co-founder of Sudowrite, which is a really, really interesting, revolutionary company that we are looking very forward to finding out more about. So James, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Excited to be here.
Excellent. Well, we are very, very grateful for you taking the time to speak to us. And of course, we wouldn't be here without the man himself, Craig Touch, the owner and founder of Hidden Gems and an author himself. So how are you doing today, Craig?
Doing well, and I'm excited as well to talk to James because we're both part of the AI Writing Summit in IMSAC, which was by the time anyone views this last month. And Sudowrite is one of those pieces of software that's been out for a while, right? It started out as an AI tool for authors, but it's really growing in popularity and it's growing in its usefulness. I've noticed that you guys are you have a changelog that when I looked at it, it seems like you're updating new features, fixing bugs all the time, which is great. So it shows that there's a lot of commitment to improving this software. And as time goes on and writers start to get more and more comfortable with the idea of working with AI to help them in their writing, your tool is becoming more popular, more accepted in the community. So we wanted to talk about it, and no better person to have on than one of the co-founders. So why don't you start off with just sort of telling us about how this all got started? Like, were you writing before you started Sudowrite, and is that why you started it, or did you start writing after Sudowrite? How did that begin?
Yeah. So at the time when prior to starting Sudowrite, I was taking a sabbatical from the tech industry. I was mainly just focused on writing fiction. So my jam is short speculative fiction, although I have a few novellas I'm developing as well. And it was really that's how I met my co-founder. So we were both sort of in the world of tech, but also very deeply wanted to write as well. So we spent a couple years together in a few writing groups. And at that time, it was when GPT-3 was first announced. And we were actually one of the first developers to get access to GPT-3, circa 2020. So way before the time of ChatGPT and all the sort of mainstream coverage of it. And even at that time, we found that integrating a tool like that into our workflow showed great promise. So yeah, we basically built this for ourselves and our writing groups and sort of the adjacent writing groups first, and we didn't even charge for the software for the first 6 months. We didn't even know okay, is this a business that we want to build? But eventually we really saw wow, a lot of the early adopters are seeing great uses for this in their creative practice, and then we kept growing, and then it all became exploded in 2022 when ChatGPT came out, and that's been an interesting ride.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, that's a lot of your background is very similar to mine, where I was in the tech industry, moved into sort of product management after a while, but then I took a leave of absence and started writing, and then I never went back to that. But then I started Hidden Gems, sort of the same way. It was like I saw all these needs, for getting reviews, and all these people were doing manual stuff where I was able to build out something more automated and that worked better. And then that was just used for myself and then for some friends, and then it became a business. So I totally understand that model. That's awesome. So now, I mean, it's been growing and growing, the explosion of ChatGPT, and it's only been in the public consciousness for, just over a year, really, I think, has probably made this even more popular, right, than it would have been, when you were early access and nobody really had any idea what it was. So how has it really grown from where you started? What are the big features that it can do now to help authors?
Yeah, so I like to think about it in terms of going from sort of a high level to the low level or into details. So at the high level, we have a bevy of tools that will be able to help authors brainstorm like their outline, characters in their world building, the overall synopsis, the overall sort of like, you know, like the structure of the novel or story that you want to tell. So a lot of authors at that level are sort of treating it like almost like a writer's room in a way, where you're just lobbing a few ideas. Maybe you're in the first or second draft. You're still trying to mold this story that you're trying to write. And yeah, in that world is really helping at the high level. And then we get down to sort of the prose level. We have tools around that where, hey, you just want an idea of how could I describe this car in this chase scene, for example. And it gets into nitty gritty, gives you lots of different cards and different ideas for those types of things. Or how can I make this paragraph more succinct? So, you know, a lot of the tools that you find similarly in ChatGPT as well, but are the lens that we have on our tool is focused specifically for fiction writers. So essentially, we've taught the AI a lot of literary conventions, literary structures to be able to really provide tools for the literary writer.
So when you talk about, you know, sort of teaching the AI, like your underlying, the model that you're running, well, when you started was GPT-3. Now, as I understand it, you're using a variety of models, right? How does that work?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. We started with OpenAI's GPT, but as the new models have been coming out, we've basically been finding whatever models are good at what they do. So, you know, we also use Claude today, but we also have, you know, dozens of experimental models that are more of our power users are using as well, but they're available for everyone. So it's almost like models and different chats are. It's almost like your favorite ice cream or your favorite color these days. It's like, okay, are you more of a Claude person or are you more of a ChatGPT person? And it's interesting because in our user base, we have different factions. Some people swear by certain models versus not. But our ethos has always been to make it more like an Apple-like experience. Like you come in, you don't really have to worry about which models you want to use. We pick the best for the task at hand.
Now, how do you determine that?
Through a lot of different means. So a lot of it is behind the scenes, just depending on what tasks you're doing. But as an example, you know, like Claude is actually really great at prose. Like its prose quality, its diversity in its prose quality is better, in my opinion, than GPT. GPT is more like C3PO. It's very logical. So in those kinds of cases, we lean heavier on, for example, if you want to make a logical outline or making edits to an outline, GPT can be better at that. Of course, all these things are shifting all the time. It feels like every day there's like a new model coming out, new capabilities. So our team does a lot of internal evaluations, but we also do a lot of evaluations with our power users. We have ambassadors in our program that will take a look at new models, evaluate certain pros that's coming out, so that when we deliver it to everyone, we know it's going to work well.
So you are picking the model that's best for a task, but it sounded like the users also have their specific favorites. So are they able to then swap out what your default is?
Yeah, so in some number of our functions, we give basically a drop-down selector that you can choose. There's all of these like open source models out there as well, like Mixtral and Ouroboros. Some of these names I've only like known for a short time as well. So our power users can choose to drill down. Most people don't. Most people, we have like what we call golden models that we can choose, like balanced versus best pros. And under the hood there, we sort of figure out route to the best model for the task at hand. Yeah.
So are the pros or power users, are they sort of just users that you've identified as power users, or is that like sort of a different tier of user of payment or whatever?
Not a different tier. It is mostly just people who are very deep into understanding these language models, and maybe even use these like open source models outside the bounds of Sudowrite as well. I'll say the top 10% of our writers in our community are probably better prompt engineers than I am, and they've been able to push the boundaries. We also have a whole plugins program as well, so users, anyone actually, can go onto Sudowrite and create their own AI function to do something. So for example, someone has made like a query letter generator, just like based on your manuscript, and so they can pick a model and prompt engineer as well. So I would say like that's like really more like the top 1% of our writers will create plugins for other writers based on the problems that they see in their daily like kind of creative practice.
Is that generally just the equivalent of ChatGPT's custom GPT?
It's similar, yes. I bet, but it's more tailored towards specific literary functions, and we have, I think, some chaining of different prompts together that is maybe missing in GPT custom, but it's similar in vein to that, yeah.
Right. So sorry to go back to I got a little distracted when I was asking. So earlier you had mentioned the idea of, I guess, sort of like the context, like that is built to be able to do a lot of this stuff for writing. Now, that's one of the issues I think with AI in general. When you write, your context, it loses context a lot, right? You get to a certain point where it starts forgetting what it was talking about or whatever. So how are you getting around that to be able to build all the sort of this functionality that is very specific to writing when you're using a model, like models that are generally, that's one of their failings, is the ability to have all that context?
Yeah, this is something that's sort of been changing as models are getting longer context these days. Now, if we were having this interview 6 months ago, I would have said, oh yeah, they're very limited. Yeah, we have to do a lot of fancy footwork in the background, which we do to be able to get the right context into the model. So that's sort of one strategy that we take behind the scenes. We find the most salient information and inject it into the model at the right time. But as I said, that's changing because, for example, Claude can do 100,000 like token context, which is about 75,000 words, right? So you possibly fit your whole entire novel in there.
Wow.
Right. So, and Gemini Pro, which is Google's newest model, can fit 1 million tokens. So I've worked with authors on that where I put in a whole series of novels and ask a question, right? Or to do some kind of processing based on that. So times are changing, but there's still a cost associated with it because sure, you can put your entire novel and then ask it to, okay, give me like an idea for the ending of this novel, but it's going to be pretty costly. So it is still a trade-off there. So I would say this is a continuous work in progress at Sudowrite. What we do is how do we balance this for the average writer when they're asking, for example, to brainstorm something. So I see it as really trying to figure out how to encapsulate the right information for the model at the right time. And for the most part, what we've done is have the writers meet the AI in the middle, which is, hey, we can't predict exactly what is in your mind, which needs this particular brainstorming or this particular writing to happen. You need to tell us. So we have a lot of affordances in the UI where you can embellish information or give us key details that the AI should pay attention to at the time of using it, right? So, and that actually goes through a lot of our philosophy, which is it's not like, we're not focused on like push button, the whole novel comes out. And that's in practice, like not how our writers are using it, versus it's more like a junior writing assistant where you're giving as much context to this person as possible to get sort of the best output. That being said, you can just like push button, but you're not going to really get a great, piece of work out that speaks to how you want to espouse your point of view to the world.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the key issues that people have with the writing that that AI produces is it's not really like you can generally tell. I mean, you can't tell in the sense like, oh, it's poorly written. It's more just like, yeah, that's not how I sound. That's not how.
Yep.
So usually, when you have it write something, most writers are going to use that as sort of a starting point, as sort of a inspiration, and then they would rewrite it in their own voice, get rid of the parts they don't want, take the parts they do want, and it's sort of just a faster way, as like you said, a writing assistant more than a writing replacement. And that's why I think a lot of authors is once they make that mindset shift, they're more willing to sort of look at AI as a possible tool for them.
So. Yeah, I mean, and just the, you know, how for example, how I use AI and how we all use AI is very personal as well. And, you know, if you were to ask what's the typical user, how they're using Sudowrite, I can't really answer that question. It's really as many users as we have on our platform. But for example, like one way I use AI is as a mirror into my own prose and also what not to write sometimes. And it's sort of a negative space. Like, for example, if I ask it to brainstorm these 5 ideas for an ending, I'll be like, okay, I'm not going to do those. I'm going to do a 6th ending that maybe has some ideas from those 5, but is totally in a different direction, right? And so a lot of authors actually use it in that sort of way, where it is almost like a diagnosis in a way of like, okay, here's the trodden path, I'm going to take the untrodden path. That being said, we also have authors that are just really great at being able to just take the AI as bones for like a scene and being like, okay, I get the bones of the scenes now. Now I'm going to make it really into my voice, right? Or to actually, another example is, let's say that you want to switch a POV on a particular chapter, and you're not quite sure, is that going to actually work? Maybe it'll be okay. So what you do is you can have, you know, Sudowrite or ChatGPT just write it in another character's point of view, and it won't be great. It's not gonna be great because it's sort of a one-shot thing, but at least you will be able to see that and be like, okay, I can see that this is gonna work. Now I'm gonna actually go do it, right? So in that way, it's almost kind of like a experimental like thing where you can just see like, these are experiments of what a machine could do. Now I'm gonna actually like go and do it my way.
Yeah, so that's a huge time saver, right? You don't have to go and say, oh, I'm going to rewrite this. I think this chapter would be better from the other person's point of view. So now I'm going to try that out. And then you go and you write the whole thing. And then you realize, nah, it was better before. It's like if you have ChatGPT or Sudowrite doing that for you, it's in a few minutes, you're just like, oh, no, that wasn't going to work. Waste of time. Next. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's an awesome, you know, use case that I've heard people mention before. It's really, really cool kind of feature. So in terms of, you know, you mentioned the idea of, you know, whether you'd want to put it in a whole novel and sort of ask it questions because of the cost base, right? So the pricing model that you use, I know, has recently switched to a credit system. And I know that's to compensate for the fact that you're using a whole bunch of underlying models, right? And they all have different pricing schemes as well. So you have to sort of have your own layer on top of that to normalize it out so people don't, you know, it's not like, oh, if you're using this function, it's going to cost this much, right? So how does that pricing model sort of work in the sense of like, as an end user, what does a credit mean, and what does it cost for them, and what can they do with it?
Right. Yeah. So that is, yeah. So moving to this credit system was to abstract out the different models, but it's also, we used to charge based on words output, and that was okay for a while. But the problem is the infrastructure cost also considers the input words, and that varies a lot based on the types of, as I was talking about, the different contexts that we need to give to the AI to be able to get the best results. So by moving to credits, we align like the costs that, you know, we bear on these language models, which can be a lot, and to users, so at least that we're talking the same. A credit is a credit. Now, in terms of how credits sort of map onto the different function, it depends, unfortunately. So some some our functions could cost like 10,000 credits for like a chapter generator that will give you the first draft of the chapter. But for something like description or like very short types of things, it could cost like 100 credits. And so the best way is to look at the credit log to see how that sort of lines up in terms of order of magnitude. And then this also allows you to be able to specify when you're specifying which model to use. So our users can be like, okay, well, maybe this is not like a very important piece of output. I'm going to use a lower powered model, which means that they can then ratchet the price down when they're ready to be like, okay, this is a really important paragraph or brainstorm. I'm going to use a higher powered model as well. So basically, short answer, it varies based on functions. And if you're working on like a short story versus novel length or series, we have different plans that will fit those budgets.
So it still is then dependent on the underlying model to some degree then. So you can say, for example, if you were doing some process that said it was, let's say, arbitrarily 10,000 credits for the GPT model, and then if you selected a different model, maybe it's 9,000 credits or something like that. Is that what you mean?
Yep. And in those cases, in those cases, specifically the chapter generator feature, we give an estimate as well. We can't give a precise because these things are statistical machines, so we don't quite know exactly how long of an output is going to have. But in those cases, you would at least know kind of the ballpark range for these things.
Right, and I see on your the website, so just so that people have a sort of an idea, there's like your most popular plan, $22 a month for 1 million credits. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So
for the middle plan, the pro plan.
Yeah. So just so people have an idea of what how much that would cost. So if somebody was to then go to ChatGPT and do try to get the same sort of results, what is it that they can't do? Assuming they're good at prompting, they're good at providing the context, going directly to a model is going to be cheaper in the sense that they don't have to pay the extra cost that it would to you guys obviously have to profit off of it as well, right? But is there stuff that they wouldn't even be able to do without sort of Sudowrite, or is it like just a matter of really just knowing how to do it or how to prompt properly? Or like I'm not sure if there's more than just a layer of building the prompts and pulling in context from different sections that you guys are doing under the covers based on what someone could do if they were just in the ChatGPT interface themselves.
Yeah, I would say that there's a certain percentage of things that you probably can do, but it's going to be quite onerous. I mean, I think at the top level is we're organized around documents, right? Your manuscript. So you're using AI functions that are native in that interface. So you're highlighting text. We keep track. AI gives the right context all the time. And when using ChatGPT, you're doing a bunch of copy pasting back and forth. It's going to not remember your other sessions necessarily, and yeah, so that's quite onerous. And I would say that's like sort of deep workflow types of considerations. You're going to save a lot of time doing it this way using Sudowrite. Another consideration is content filtering. This is actually like a big problem, in my opinion, about these large foundational models, that they're getting more prudish and therefore worse for fiction writers, at least in their raw form of using ChatGPT or Claude directly. And many times, actually, as an author, you can get banned from using these language models directly if you have a murder in a scene, heaven forbid, right? So we have lots of mechanisms, and also in some cases, special deals with these providers where it's more lenient. And we also have fallbacks in case of if you have very explicit content. We do our best to serve every piece of content. The only place where we draw the line is sexual content involving minors. So we have people doing very dark horror, writing erotica, or just writing thriller with really kind of gruesome scenes. Sudowrite will be able to handle that. So I would say that's like a big piece that we invest a lot of time on to make sure that you as a creative person can be creative without bounds, right? So that's just the core of the thing. And instead, we're working on a lot of things under the hood. For example, one thing we're working on is something that will be able to emulate your voice based on you uploading all your works.
That's amazing.
So this is something that's coming down the pipeline. We're doing a beta test, a very early alpha test with some of our authors, but showing great promise. And it's specifically aimed at literary writers, right? So I would say that's also the underlying thing is that ChatGPT, Claude, like they're not really like focused on literary writers specifically. Like I would say that they're actually like more geared towards business writers, people who are writing emails. That's why they're very focused on safety, right? Whereas our team, we're very focused on story narrative writers.
Yeah, so with the context being a fixed length for some of these, how are you able to say upload all of your book? Somebody has 20 books, you wouldn't have the ability, other than maybe Gemini. I mean, I don't know how many words are in 20 books, but how would it have that be able to read all that? And then I guess the other part of that is, because you have to feed that context in each time, wouldn't that be really expensive to, every time you say create some content in my voice, it's kind of got to feed that sort of information back into the GPT to be able to have it do that?
Yeah, so I would say that there's a difference between functions that are trying to emulate style and voice versus like doing analysis. Now, if we're doing analysis and you're saying that, hey, I want to figure out what the plot holes in my novel is. For those, you probably have to feed it all the context. And we've actually done experiments with Gemini, and it's actually pretty good at doing those types of things. But for style and voice, our approach is going to be fine-tuning. So creation of our own model based on top of either a foundation model or open source model, such that when you feed in your books, we do a special training that is on top of the training of the model that is currently done. So that is a specialized model just for you. And then the cost of that will not be as if you're putting in 20 novels each time for every single context call. It will be within the same range as a normal like AI function call. Yeah.
So like your custom models are kind of like I guess for people that don't understand how a lot of the AI stuff works, you are able to do in training of your own. People build models all the time, right? And I run on my own machine. I run some text AI as well as some graphic AI stuff. And so I would download models that people have trained and then, that one model is going to be different than the other. And that's sort of with the AI, with the big AI stuff, ChatGPT and Gemini and Claude, they've sort of built a whole thing. It's not just a different model. It's like a whole different thing, right? But you're able to take those models and do extra training on them. Right? Is that what you're talking about? You're building out a training that sort of fits inside of ChatGPT or inside of Claude. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. It's sort of extending, it's fine-tuning the weights of the model after it's already been trained. So like GPT, Claude, they do a lot of stuff to train. And what comes out of that training is, if you think about just like connections in the brain, it's like a billion floating numbers in this training set. But it's very general, right? So they're trained to be able to do emails, to be able to do like analysis of code, and like programming is all kind of in this one brain. Now, if we take Craig, like your books, and we do what's called a fine-tuning process, we sort of basically say, hey, forget about like this programming stuff and all this other things, but fine-tune it so that we're focused on trying to emulate Craig's style, prose style, based on these books. suddenly the model becomes less capable of doing, addition and some of these other things that are noise essentially for you, for your purpose. But suddenly it's like, oh wow, some of the turns of phrases and the tropes that Craig loves to use, it's going to be honed in on it, and it's going to be able to translate from, for example, how to brainstorm plot points much better and relevant to kind of like the books that you've written. So there's a lot of, and we're doing a lot of testing on this because it's definitely not a trivial process. Because, well, what if you have different series of books? Maybe you should have a model for each series. So these are the types of questions that we're trying to answer now with our writers and our user base right now. But at least like this brings back to, I think what I think Roland might have mentioned, that you can sort of tell when something is written by AI. And maybe it's word choice, maybe it's just, you just sort of know, right? And what we've all found is like by fine tuning it, even doing even a small fine tune, it unmasks his sort of AI so that it doesn't seem like it anymore. It actually feels more organic. And I think this is because like we're all using GPT and we're all using Claude, like the general like public is using these things, and therefore the tropes of these models are not everyone's tropes, because we all see it all the time. We're like, well, yeah, it's using this particular word choice. But as soon as you fine tune it, it shifts its the space of these tropes to your tropes, and those are personal, right? So as soon as you see that, you're like, oh wow, this doesn't feel like GPT anymore, or this doesn't feel like Claude, or it doesn't feel like any of these models. It feels more like me. Now it's not perfect, but it's going to be able to get in that more direction. Basically, everything it generates will be more attuned to you.
That's fascinating. We've experimented with using ChatGPT to write some blurbs and things, and one of the things we always joke about is how it uses the same phrases and the same tropes. It's always like in this thrilling episode, and certain words and hyperboles, and there's that uncanny valley. You can read it and you can almost immediately tell, oh, this is AI generated. But I'm interested. I mean, I've got 12 books in one of my series, and I can be quite repetitive. I use particular phrases a lot, maybe a ripple from Ian Fleming, but it would be really interesting to see those like appear instead of the cliche terms that we see in general ChatGPT.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, our writers, they actually have a few documents they pass around that are called AI-isms or AI administrations all the time. Then it's funny. For example, if you write romance, if you ask ChatGPT to write romance set in any town, it'll always be Willow Creek, or 80% of the time Willow Creek. I don't know why it's Willow Creek, but it happens to be Willow Creek. If you set it in fantasy, it loves Eldoria. If you just do a pretty naive prompt. I mean, Eldoria is used in a lot of fantasy worlds, but it's not like the top thing. But it's kind of weird how the AI sort of settles on these. I call them like local maximas of like, okay, it's gonna be Eldoria, and so then you can prompt it to even without fine tuning, to be able to get it into a place where it won't regurgitate like these kinds of cliches. But it's harder to do that, and it does take some know-how. So if you just go straight to ChatGPT, you're going to get these sorts of same ministrations coming out over and over again.
Yeah, and I think that sort of unfortunately reinforces the misguided belief that some authors still sort of have that that GPT, like that AI is plagiarizing, right? It's pulling stuff from other books that already exists, and when you say stuff like that, in some people's minds, I'm sure they're like, see, it is doing that. It's pulling those names because it's reading another book and stealing it. But it's more like it's been trained on all this data, and that's just sort of part of its training thing. So like it's like, oh, I need a name, so what's a common name? And then that's, for some reason, that's weighted in as a common name, right? Whereas, the idea of plagiarism, you're not going to get the same paragraph that's written in another book because it's not pulling from other books. It's a language model that's building upon, each word that it writes is coming from a statistical model of the most likely words that should fit there, and then it's using some randomization and then temperatures and this and that, and then the next word is based on that too. So like it's like the infinite monkeys thing. Yeah, I guess you could eventually come up with something that exists, but it would take you infinite number of years, just because of the permutations, right? So as long as people understand that, it's the same reason why people say to fact check it, right? The hallucination idea. It's like you always want to do that, and you want to that's why people don't want to use it to write and then take that writing and then just publish it. You have to rewrite it, you have to fact check, you have to do everything, but it's so much faster than starting from zero, from the blank page, which often is what people get stuck on, that blank page syndrome. And AI can often get you past that because it's like, okay, I can't think of what to do here. I've been stuck for 2 days because I can't. And then you ask AI to do it and it'll come up with an idea. You say, give me 10 ideas of where this should go. And it'll give you, and even if you don't use any of them, it'll spark something, your brain starts moving in directions that it wasn't going before because you were stuck. And that's just infinitely more powerful than just staring at your blank screen waiting for something to change.
Yeah.
So what is the most common thing that people use Sudowrite for? Which functions? Like for me, I think brainstorming and outlining would be one of the tools that I would use most. But in general, though, what do you find that people really gravitate to?
Yeah, well, our most common function is just sort of the autocomplete the next the current paragraph function, just because sort of in the top left corner is called the write button. And we find that people use that when they're just sort of just really stuck on this particular. This is at the very detail level, right? At the level of prose. And what that does is really just give you different cards of choices where to go next.
Sorry, just to interrupt, just because we never really, I guess, talked about it. You can use Sudowrite as a tool. Let's say, you're writing your document in Word or whatever, and then you go into Sudowrite and you do some stuff. But you can use it as your word processor and write your novel in it too, right? Like,
yeah, that's right. Yeah,
right.
We have full project capabilities, and you're able to have all your chapters, and a lot of our authors work that way. Yeah.
Right, and then that's not costing anything extra because that's not even sending anything to the AI, right? So somebody has their account, their whatever monthly plan they're on, and they're just using it to write, and maybe they don't use any of those functions or hardly ever use any of those functions. I mean, if they're never using it, then they don't use the program. But if they're hardly ever using it, then it's not actually using any of their credits at all. It's just when you start to say, okay, I'm stuck here, I want to do brainstorming or I want to do autocomplete, that's when it would, costs a few credits. So just because you said like, oh, the autocomplete the chapter, and I'm thinking, we never talked about the idea that you could just use this as a word processor. So that's interesting. So somebody's typing it away, and like I was saying, you might get stuck and you're sitting there, then you hit finish this paragraph, and the AI will then finish your paragraph. And then, of course, like I said, you look at that and maybe it's not at all what you were thinking, but it gets you moving again. So that's really cool.
Yeah,
and then
for sure.
What else do they?
Yeah, and our describe feature is also pretty popular. Just giving you different. For example, you can highlight the car in this particular scene. What it does is it takes a look at the context of this car chase, and it will give you all 5 senses of taste, smell, sight, and also like literary sort of metaphorical descriptions. And all these things sort of like put into card sets on the right side of your screen, so they're not inserted directly into your manuscript. So you can kind of see this as like a brainstorming partner in that way. And a lot of people just use little bits and pieces of like what they see on the cards to just ideate different things. I would say those two are more popular just because it's very surgical, and you can maybe use it as you're going through like maybe your 3rd or 4th draft, and you're just like fleshing out different things. in each scene. I will say that we also have, you know, the higher level, like the story Bible types of functions, where people, as they're getting started out, like fleshing out outlines, and things like that. Maybe less popular in terms of numbers, because most people are in the middle of a novel, not starting new ones every day. Well, I sometimes do that, but it's not a good practice to do that. But yeah, so fleshing out like sort of the high level things is sort of like, I would say, the second most popular types of functions.
And that is sort of, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that is, if people are familiar with other tools like Scrivener or whatever, where you can put in all this information about your book, your character outlines and your plot and this and that, right? So when you're using something like Scrivener, that's great. You use it for reference. You say, you go over there and you know, I can't remember this or that, and you check, and it's all in one document. It's great. But if you're doing that in Sudowrite, it could be using that information as part of its context when you ask it to write. So it's, you know, if you say finish this paragraph and the paragraph is about one of the characters, it can refer to your character outline so that it's going to get the details right, not just make stuff up. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. And we're actually, our team is currently in the midst of doing a major upgrade to that functionality to be able to give the right context. The way I sort of see it from a programming point of view is that we're kind of making a story graph of your novel. And this graph includes things like your characters, includes, you know, like milestones for those characters, the relationships between the characters. How do we represent all these things in a way that is legible to the AI without having to stuff everything all the time into it? And that poses, there are some challenges there. For example, what if your character has a secret that's not supposed to be revealed until chapter 12? If you put that in the context all the time, guess what the AI is going to do? Don't think about the pink elephant. It's going to think about the pink elephant. So we can actually call this the pink elephant syndrome of AI. So we also do a lot of things where we try to mask it out so that we give the context, but not too much. So it's kind of a fine art there. Like, how do you construct this context so that it's best for the task at hand? Now, obviously, if you're past chapter 12, okay, it's probably a big reveal that the AI probably needs to know. And it sort of mimics like how our brain is working too. When I'm working on a scene, I know the piece I'm trying to write. I know the characters. I know kind of the mind state of the characters in this particular scene. You try to embody them. At least that's kind of what I do. How can we also help the AI sort of embody these characters? So a lot of challenges there. I sort of see it like the current version of the app is like V1. So we're working on a major upgrade to that right now.
Now,
how big is your team? Is that all out? Sorry, is that all out in you're out in California, I guess, right?
Yep, I'm in San Francisco.
How big is your team, Sudowrite's team?
So we have 7 core members. We're all remote, so all across the world. I'll say if you include contractors, maybe like 10, 12 people. So still like small startup, and we like to keep. Where our plan is to really keep it small, and you know, ever since last year, we've been profitable as well. So yeah, we really like see this as, you know, we want to make a sustainable business and really be able to focus in on creatives. That's where we're really focused on.
Being profitable is fantastic. That's not many companies can say that. Not many startups can say that.
Yeah, I will credit ChatGPT. I mean, I think ChatGPT really was kind of bad news for a lot of like business writing apps or general writing apps, because guess what? Like, it can probably do 80% of that, and it's like really cheap, right? What it did for us is really it brought the awareness of like, oh, these tools, this class of tool exists, but it's not quite what I need for narrative writing. And then that's when they really found us. So yeah, it's been kind of a crazy trip the past year or so, and we see ourselves as sort of the stewards too of like, how do we pair AI in a mindful way with your daily like craft? Because yeah, there are many ways to do this mindlessly, just like push the button again. It's just not going to be great. So we're also writing this handbook, like how to actually use AI in a mindful way. And we also teach classes. So we have like about 12 ambassadors who teach classes every week about how to use AI Sudowrite for romance writing, or how to use it for thrillers. And these are authors in these particular genres sharing their tips and tricks and sort of like how they see AIs being integrated into their craft. So we're very serious about that. Sort of like we are, how do we make this company in a slow fashion of like, it's not just an overnight thing. Like it's going to require investment and understanding how these practices should be built, right? It's going to take time for that. And it's funny because one thing is our incorporation name is actually called Human++. So humans at the center, plus. It's augmented, but humans first, right? So, and that goes through and through in our ethos.
Well, I love that. And that we are just coming up to the top of the hour. So that's actually a wonderful thing to end on, humans first. It almost sounds like a political thing, isn't it? Instead of like America first, it's now humans first. But I could get behind that. So as we wrap up, before I ask you, James, to give us the information about where everyone can go and check out Sudowrite, Craig, do you have any final questions? Because I know this is your area of expertise and interest.
I mean, I'm fascinated by this sort of stuff, and I love what you guys are doing and the direction you're taking, and the idea that you're doing it in a mindful way. Because, as I said, I talked to a lot of authors, and it's changing, but they're still very concerned about writing with AI and how AI can. They're worried about it, taking over and ripping people off, and all the ethical concerns and this and that, right? But they are coming around to the idea that it's not going away, that sort of the idea that burying your head in the sand and ignoring it completely is not great for your career. So there's different levels of your own comfort that you can do. You can choose to use AI, but I'm a big proponent of figuring out where it will be useful to you and what you're comfortable with, and then going that route, and instead of just not using it at all, right? Because I think you're doing yourself a disservice. It can really, really supercharge your career. It's a whole new thing that, it's like going from handwriting to typing. It's going to make you go much faster and be much more efficient. And so I love that you guys are building this out. I'm really excited about it. So thanks again for coming on and talking to us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was fun.
Now, James, where can people go and check out Sudowrite, and what should be the first thing that they do when they get there?
Yeah, you can find us at Sudowrite.com. So it's SUDOWRITE.com.
And we'll obviously put a link down below.
Yeah, and we have a free trial. So you can come and sign up immediately. And I would say that try out a scene that you're stuck on. And you just say, like, I reworked this scene, or I just don't know what to do with it. Just try a few of our functions and see if it gives you any useful suggestions.
Well, that's always a good place to start, isn't it? Well, James, thank you so much for joining us. I think this has been such a fascinating discussion, and I'm sure everyone listening to this has opinions already. So hopefully they'll go and check out Sudowrite and decide where those opinions go. But yes, go to our description here and you will find a link to Sudowrite. While you're down there, why don't you leave James a comment in the comment section and let him know how much you appreciated everything that he came on board to share with us today. And since you're down there, you might also hit that like button, that subscribe button. There's a little bell icon that you can click so you get notified every time there is a new episode of Fully Booked. And we'll be back next week with a brand new episode. So until then, cheerio.